conversation. I'm very fortunate and grateful to be the host of this conversation. My name is Justin Bedard, and I have three of my mentors who over the years I've collaborated in many different ways. They'll introduce themselves in a bit, but I've got James, Ron, and Brett joining us on this call. And then lots of people from around the world also joining who will be typing in questions. Today's conversation is designed to be less of sort of a panel presentation, but more an exploration. Our goal is to explore how experiential learning is evolving within the needs of school and education, and not just as a program, but as a pedagogical tool, and also a strategic driver for what schools are trying to create for themselves. And the spirit of the conversation is really curiosity and connection. So you'll hear Brett and James and Ron asking each other, like, oh, what are you doing? How are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And we may, come across in the conversation. My job is to really pose the questions, open the can, and hope the can doesn't explode too much, and then put it back in. One of the great things, if you're joining us, we're going to be sharing a summary notes from all the conversations that we have. Will also be some video. So you can take notes, you can ask questions, but also know that if you're on this call, you'll be getting some great resources for you to use as you look to do strategic thinking moving forward for your school or for however your organization works. And the way that we'll intro, I'm not going to introduce them. They're going to get to introduce themselves. They're going to say their name, where they're from, in terms of where they're joining us from and what school they're in. And then they're going to share a story. They do a little bit of storytelling about a transformational moment that they have had individually. And then because we're all learning, they're going to tell us what they want to be when they grow up. And then when that wraps up, I'll kind of lead us into our first topic, which will be strategy of schools. So James is down in the southern part, so we're going to be going south to north. So James, I'll ask you to start us off with an intro.
All right, thanks, Justin. My name's James DL. I'm currently at NIST International School in beautiful downtown Bangkok on Soi 15. If you've visited Bangkok, you've probably walked past or at least near the school. My story, the experiential story, or just a general story about education, actually in my first year of teaching, my very first job in 1992 was I got the only job in my school board that was available, which was a full-time learning support teacher, which meant I taught 14 kids who'd been expelled from all the local schools and joined me in the basement of an old town hall. And so it was basically just get rid of these kids out of school and give them to this new teacher for a couple of months and we'll see how it goes. And the advice that I asked for from my boss at the time, Mel Barkwell, I said, Mel, what do I do? And he said, honestly, show up, open the door, turn on the heat, and just be there. And you realize that for me, as a first learning experience with those kids, was school looks different, and we need to meet the needs of the kids in terms of what they need at the time. And so that was really transformative for me as an educator, especially on my first day of teaching ever as a professional getting paid. Just that idea of education looks different, and we just need to meet kids where they are and give them what they need. And when I grow up, I want to be lots of things still. I'm still waiting to grow up, as my wife will tell you. Definitely a fireman, definitely an ambassador, which is really, I put out fires every day and I'm a diplomat. So kind of still doing the jobs, but kind of in a different format.
Very good.
Great. Over to you, Ron.
Great, no problem. So my name is Ron Raukema. This is my 12th year at HKIS. I hail from the United States on the East Coast in North Carolina, and that's kind of where my story starts. I remember being an administrator in Durham, North Carolina, as it's back in the late 90s, to give you a little bit of a date. And as we're starting these schools with the partnership with Duke University at the time. These are public schools that needed to help develop a community in a place where the integration was still happening between the city school system and the county school system. So we're looking at building schools of choice. And one of the first schools that I was part of really didn't have great test scores. It was taken over by the state of North Carolina back in 1998 and was left with firing the entire faculty and giving us the commission to come in and start as a new administrative team and bring in new faculty and new ideas. The students actually scored so poorly the year before I arrived that they would have done better guessing on the state test than if they had actually taken it for heart. So that was really a bad indicator of what that type of school we were getting into. But believing in students and believing in knowledge and being able to connect, we were able to develop a school at that point in time that was focused more on arts and education and music and trying to find places where students could be successful. We brought in Socratic seminars and into learning experiences into that community, as well as mentors from the universities of Duke and Chapel Hill, sports athletes, and really showed the kids that they could be more than what they thought they could be. And within a 3-year period, we were able to have students who were not only scoring well, but leading the district in end of course testing. So again, learning through different means and different possibilities, connecting with students and getting them engaged in their education through their own curiosities about what's important. For me, when I grow up, I really, really do hope to continue my work as a lover of history and lover of learning. I actually have always wanted to own the country bookstore in Southern Pines, North Carolina, and open up a coffee shop adjoining to it and just really enjoy great books, having author talks, and drinking good coffee as people come through.
Cool. Over to you, Brett.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Brett Penny. I'm the director at the American International School of Budapest here in Hungary. Really lucky. We sit outside of the city on the edge of the national park. So it's a beautiful location and yeah, I feel very fortunate to be here. I would like to share just a quick story from the perspective of a student. When I was at school, I grew up in a very small town in New Zealand, population at the time about 3,500 people. And the school had its own location. It was an old farm homestead right in the middle of Mount Aspiring National Park. So you're not allowed to build any buildings in a national park. This was an existing building, and the school owned it. So through my time in high school, I had many opportunities to go up there. We would do our biology up there. We would go into the national park. We would go up and we'd support younger students up there. And then you had the opportunity to do service and sort of contribute back, go up on weekends and do painting and do those sorts of things on the upkeep of the building. And I feel really fortunate for those experiences when I was younger. And I'm really hoping that we can give our students those similar sorts of experiences today. And when I grow up, well, I've just done a really significant 360 evaluation, and what I realize is I have a lot to learn and a lot still to do to grow in the role. So I think for me, just lots of further learning on how to be a better director, and I can see I've got still a long way to go. But thank you.
Well, thanks, James, Ron, and Brett. We're anchored into your stories now, and we'll start the stories of the future in terms of looking at vision and strategy. We'll start with a quote for each section, and this is from Kurt Hahn, one of the founders of experiential education in the modern context, and Outward Bound and UWC and many other things. And he said, "I regard it as the most foremost task of education to ensure the survival of these qualities: an enterprising curiosity, an undefeatable spirit, tenacity in pursuit, readiness for sensible self-denial, and above all, compassion." So that's Kurt Hahn. And so the first question will kind of go to Ron, and it is experiential learning becoming a defining part of your school's, HKS's strategy and vision, not just as a program or initiative, but kind of what the school is trying to create? And if it is, what was the driver behind this decision, and how are you seeing it play out?
Sure. What I would say that it's a continuing effort on all of our parts. If you know HKIS, we're about 3,100 students in total, so it's a very large ship. We don't like to call it the Titanic heading towards an iceberg. We prefer aircraft carrier moving through the waters because it's very difficult to steer, as you can imagine. And one of the things that we look at is how to create experiences for students that go from all the way from our 4-year-old program at R1 through 12th grade and vary that out. Strategically, we call it learning from the Reggio model of here we are within our play, and how do we develop curiosity through that play. But then as we get older into the upper primary and into the middle and high school, we focus a lot on place-based learning. Where are we in society? Much like Brent's school that he grew up in, our school's on a national park as well, which gives us great opportunities for our lower primary, upper primary students to learn through their science units and down on the beach, and work through erosion projects and work with learning more about the tides and how things are influenced, all the way through the forest, which is also into the hills, and developing an understanding of the leaf and fauna of Hong Kong. And then as we move into middle school and high school, our middle school has a lot of activity learning, getting them out into interdisciplinary units. And we're still always developing this. This isn't perfect yet, but it's a place that we strive to continue through. And using the objectivity of the water outside of our school to be able to access the reefs and the mangroves, and to do environmental science and looking at how the water is changing because of pollutions, but also how we can impact that and make it better within our own backyard. And then as the children go into high school and the students go and grow older, we're looking and exploring ways to create internship opportunities for them to use that knowledge, because all students need to be exposed to it at younger ages, but as they get older, developing that knowledge in a further capacity to go out into the businesses, into the vibrant parts of Hong Kong, to study science, math, and finance in the city that we have here at our doorstep. Again, this is very hard to do, as you can imagine, with the size of the ship that we're steering, but we're opening up avenues for students as we can.
And Brett, and we'll go to you and then come over to you, James. Brett, like what is the role of experiential education? I mean, Ron mapped out how it's integrated across a lot of what HKS is trying to do and doing. I mean, how do you see that coming out in sort of your conversation in terms of your strategic planning for what AISB is doing?
Yeah, so we're in the midpoint of a strategic plan, and when we developed the plan just over 2 years ago, we put experiential learning at the forefront of that plan. And I think for a couple of reasons. One was we saw, obviously see the benefit of that, and you know, in terms of the impact it can have on students. Another big piece was the school was talking about how to create authentic learning opportunities for students. So they've done a lot of work around what is the future of learning, what's the future need, you know, what role do schools play? And so that authenticity of learning was really driving some of those conversations. It's also led to some other things that are happening at the school around curriculum development as well, and trying to give, much like Ron's talked about, you know, building opportunities for students, building pathways for students, but also, you know, looking at those real life experiences such as internships when students reach high school, those sorts of things. There was a strong culture here of the students having a really strong engagement with nature. So we're on the edge of a national park, and that is definitely used, but it's used mainly with the younger students, and we're really looking to how we build out our program in middle and high school.
And James, for you, where does experiential education sit in your school's vision and NISTs and what's going on?
Yeah, I think obviously important. We signaled that importance early on when we talk about our learning program. I mean, we talk about the academics, we talk about the activities in sport, we talk about the service, we talk about well-being. And the fifth part of the swirl is experiential education. And I think signaling that very clearly was a big step for us. And then embedding it within the school as well. And really, I mean, I'm a big fan of Kurt Hahn. And I think the whole idea, you know, like around that sensible self-denial is really what we're looking at within how are we expressing that within the school. And I guess also to say, to have a definition of experiential education too, to say if the classroom, the classical classroom is the thinking, and then there's some practicing in terms of some acting, the experiential education is actually getting out in the doing, right? This is the actually on-site, on location, and then spinning in that sensible self-denial. I love the fact that it rains when we're on camp, right? And it's just that of now more than ever, we need, I think, people to experience the fact that they're not made of sugar and that you can get out and do things and it's not going to feel comfortable. And I think, I mean, by Vygotsky's definition of proximal, like the proximal development, being uncomfortable probably means there's learning happening, as long as it's, sensible. And I think the sensible self-denying too, in the age of cell phones, how might we put those aside? In the age of, taking a risk of talking in a group, how do we make that happen? And I think there's so many opportunities for that to happen right now in the experiential part of education.
And I mean, just to go on a little bit of a journey, one of the questions that came up from the Cows School, two educators there, Carrie and Cass, they were asking around board and parents. And basically, when you look at the board and the parents who say, "Oh, we can't take time away from the very important curriculum," how do you work or navigate buy-in? And some schools, they don't have heads like the three of you who are driving experiential education as, a core principle. And so what would be some thoughts or ideas that you have around getting people bought in to the power and the potential of experiential education? I'll just kind of open to anyone who wants to share their journey or their thoughts around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe just to jump in first, I think, you started us with, what's an experience we've had, and we've all had that really powerful experience. And I think storytelling plays a big part in that, and having, board members to think about the things that have shaped their own lives. And I think too, another thing that boards like is that idea of efficiency. If you're trying to reach certain metrics in a school, you're trying to develop certain dispositions with students. If there's a really efficient way to do that, why not do it? And I think when we talk to our community, these are the types of experiences that parents are seeking for their children. They're not always in a position to offer them themselves, so they're really grateful that the school is taking on that challenge. So I think that's the way we've done it, is sort of talking about what it could be, and having them dream a little bit with us, and then build that excitement.
Over to you, James.
Yeah, I mean, what a great, absolutely, and that emotional connection to what you're doing. One of my favorite questions to ask parents is always, what do you remember, or what was a formative time in your education? And almost always there was an emotional connection to it, and it was in an experience. It usually wasn't in a classroom. It was usually out somewhere that was, outside doing something, sporting event, music event, outdoor education, on the trip, whatever it is. And I think Brett's right? It's those stories, and by personal example, and we know our highest leverage learning often came when we were doing and emoting and feeling. And I think that's a big part of this too, is like, how do we then intentionally create and curate opportunities for students to be able to do that, as Brett said too, with some of their own agency too. What's meaningful for them?
And I just to add on to that too, I think as you build up this understanding and are communicating the stories back to your board or your governance, it's also important to lean into what's important to them. And when you think about Hong Kong, a lot of people think about the fact, A, experiences are hard to come by because it's a concrete jungle. B, it's a little difficult to navigate without talking about what college people want to go to. And what better way to prepare a child than to provide opportunities that make them stand out and give them opportunities to lead or even to experience things that they normally wouldn't. And those are the types of things that we lean into in experiential learning, is how do we provide opportunities that make them different. And whether it's dealing with AI or dealing with college or dealing with other topics that come up, the most authentic way to reach a learner and to show the learnings, to have them do what they need to do physically. So I think that's part of that leaning into, as you sell this to a community that really is interested in the outcome. If we can convince people the outcome is reliant on the curiosity and experience of the student, we're bettering them for the future.
And where do you see this coming in from? I think you addressed this, Ron, the evolution of AI and all of this in terms of portfolios of students who are applying to colleges. And what are you guys hearing from the powers that be at these universities of what they're looking for? Because I think this is really a driving force, where I think schools who are looking to leverage the potential of experiential education have to speak that language. So, I mean, maybe start with you, James, and we'll go around. Any ideas or thoughts of how to use this as a leverage point for differentiating children to get into universities?
Sure. I mean, when we think about, okay, so if our experiential cycle is going to be the theoretical thinking, then a little bit of safe practicing, then the experiencing, the fourth part of that is reflecting. And I think this is what helps our our future life afterwards in terms of how are we reflecting, how might that be expressed in our university letters or in our notes, because it's making meaning, deep meaning of the experiences that we've had. And I think that's having an experience is one thing, having a learning experience is another. And the learning comes from the reflecting and having conversations, thinking about, Justin and I, we went through the same experience about something. How did you see it? Here's how I see it. Here's how that was different from you. We have different schema. Of course, we're going to see things differently. And I guess it's the school's job for us to intentionally frame those conversations and provide opportunities for students to be able to engage in that thinking as well. So it's more than just, okay, sticking kids out into the experience. It's then what are we doing afterwards that's a meaningful reflection so that we're reflecting on our own learning. How are you different now? What advice would you give yourself from the beginning if you know, like knowing what you know now? All of those thinking structures that we can build into the teaching and learning of the school too.
Great. Ron?
The only thing I'd add to that is as you're looking at reflecting, often when we, as a school, we're expected to assess students and student learning. And if reflecting is component of that, then we can actually see the authentic aspects that they, as an individual, have taken out of the learning. And I think often when you think about AI, it's a collective information that they're able to pull from the internet, which if you ask somebody for the version of Cliff Notes of To Kill a Mockingbird, they'll be able to pull that up pretty quickly off the internet. But if you talk about personal experience and have them either involved in or role playing something that allows us to have the idea of discrimination, that then allows them to reflect on that learning and actually be assessed on what they learned from that experience. And it becomes authentic, it becomes true, it becomes individualized. And that also is what makes students a little bit more prepared as we talk about what's next in their life, because now they've had these experiences they can reflect back on and say, this is what made me believe what I believe today. We had great experiences. My daughter just graduated last year, and about ninth grade, she decided to become a vegetarian because of things we were doing in the school. And I mean, if you spend any time with me, I am not a vegetarian. So it was a big change for us as a family to embrace this and to bring her home. But all based on the learning around the environment and the importance of taking care of the future is what she based these decisions on. And I think those are things that we attribute to the experiences they had in school.
Cool. And Brett, anything you'd add?
I think they've summed it up really well. I think one other piece we're talking about is as students working on their pathway through the school, we're talking about pathways to contribution. So what are you doing as a result of your learning? How can that have a positive impact on others? And trying to think about, the experiences we design for students, what difference can that make? But also increasingly, how do we involve students in the planning of those? So what about the leadership component of that, and where students can lead some of this learning rather than participate in the learning? So I think that there are some others, and I think those sorts of things really is what would make you stand out in a university application. Going back to what Ron and James have talked about, that authenticity that comes through when you're talking about experiences, with the things that you've done, the things you've experienced.
And the final question in this area, which I always like to ask, is what is the experiential education program that you see in the world that's happening in another school or in somewhere else that you're like, that that's what you want to bring into your school? So not about what you're doing, but what are you seeing other schools doing, or another school or another program that you're really inspired by and you want to try and bring into the work that you're doing with your educators and your students? James, you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. And I guess one of the things, I'm going to use this as a generic idea. I've long had a passion for starting a school semester in Helsinki and walking to Greece, and with a group of kids and a group of educators. And I mean, I know that idea is not new, and it's in many different forms around the world. But I think it's not a short experience, it's a long-lived experience. And I think that for students to be able to integrate with adults and think about the ongoing intended learning, but to do it in the moment for a long period of time, definitely outside of a comfort zone, I think would be something that is something aspirational. I don't know what that looks like. Extended time in the field, I think would be an extraordinary experience for students.
Go over to you, Ron.
Yeah, I think as we look at some of the schools that I've experienced and seen in the U.S. as well as some of the internationals, but it's less likely in the internationals, is the idea of how you adjust time and make it so that students can be both here and out at the same time. And what I mean by that is if you think about these pathways that Brent and James were talking about, is taking those pathways a little bit further and saying, why are we trying to cram everything between 8 and 3 in a school day? What are options that we have, even at junior level, senior level, for creating almost a junior college experience, and where students can go out and have experiences in the community and still receive credit back at the school and still get their core academics maybe at 5 o'clock at night or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, run their athletics in the morning when nobody's on the fields because the fields are less used at that time, and just using time differently. And I think a lot of times schools get structured in a way that are unable to think beyond that. And I've seen this be very successful, obviously in public schools, believe it or not, throughout the United States, as they've grappled with the idea of early college, high schools, and looking at what kind of opportunities go for what they call workforce development. And I'm not saying that we need to develop workforce development, but how do we use that same time factor to develop experiences for kids where they get practical experiences in life?
Super interesting. Brett, over to you.
Yeah, I love both those examples. I think the other thing I've seen in other schools, which I really appreciate, is just that increase ownership and agency coming from students as they move through. So by the time they're, moving closer to graduation, they're either planning their own trip or planning the trip for others, whether it's younger students or taking on more of that leadership. So starting to give back, having benefited from many years of, participation. And I know many, I think, James, you've had experience with that sort of model of the students planning the trips, etc. I sort of think that's the ultimate, and it shows a real readiness, for that next step in life as well.
Okay, on to the next topic. I think we went into strategy and vision. Hopefully the people who are listening can draw some of that into the stuff they're building and designing for their schools. The next topic is the one that everyone's talking about around the world. We promised we'd only do a small treatment of it, but it is basically the state of education and the AI revolution. And I wanted to start with a quote from Jiddu Krishnamurti, who the quote says, "The highest function of education is to bring about an integrated individual who is capable of dealing with life as a whole." And so life is changing so fast. And what that actually means is life as a whole is changing. And so the question, and we'll start with Brett on this, is how has the rapid emergence of AI in the world and educational landscape in general shifted your understanding of what schools should be developing in students? And then again, our topic of experiential education, what's the role of experiential education in that evolution of what education should be looking like in this AI-centered world? Take it away, Brett.
Great, thank you. I think, dealing with the last part of that quote, dealing with life as a whole, and maybe going back to James's earlier quote, how do you know you're not made of sugar? At what age do you learn that, and what sort of experience? And I guess one of the concerns I have, and I guess I see over time in education, is society is changing, and the experiences as a result that children have are definitely changing. And I remember back to a study completed by David Whitebread from Cambridge University. It was on play, so it was directed at early years educators and looking at the history of play and the importance of play and how this fundamental form of learning, which has been in place for thousands of years, all of a sudden was eroding. And in that, he looked at the three factors that caused it to disappear. One was we're becoming more risk adverse as a society, so we're not as comfortable with our children taking as many risks. And I think back to my wife talking about her experience growing up on a farm in Ontario, and the rule was just be back by dark. They were off having an amazing time. That doesn't really happen, nowadays. The other is that when students do have free time, it's very structured. So they're in more sports, they're in more activities, and when they're in those activities, and it's adults making the decisions. So we're taking away important time that students could be independent, having autonomy over their decision making, grappling with life's problems. And then the third, and it's been sort of touched on already, is sort of that pushing down of the curriculum. So lower down, we're expecting more of younger students, but even what was mentioned earlier is, the pressure of universities. Students have to do more and more and more to show that they stand out. So with all of those factors and pressures, what I worry about, so thinking about life as a whole, I worry that our students aren't getting that really broad range of experiences. And that's why I think experiential learning is just so important. And then thinking about AI, I think with AI, there's probably a few areas there. I think initially schools are grappling with the ethical piece, and what that often sounds like in schools is all the reasons why we shouldn't use AI, that it will lead to cheating, it will, students won't learn, etc. And schools grapple with that, and they put in place, policies and procedures and build trust in the way it will be delivered. The next bit is, how do you benefit from AI? So how do you work with AI so that it brings about positive change? So how do teachers use it to save time? How can students use it? How will benefit from it, with particular resources, etc. And then the third, which I think is sort of the pinnacle, is how do you leverage AI to really make a difference, like to work with AI to solve complex problems, to really use it at its full potential. So to go back, I think that second point, how do you benefit from AI? I think that is going to have a massive change in the future and free up a lot of time. So I think the way it's going to move, it's going to be more adaptive. And so we've seen Google come out in the last few weeks with a learn your way. You can put a textbook into it and it will teach you in your preferred interests, etc. I mean, that's just going to get better and better. And I think what it will bring about is an efficiency of certain types of learning, not all learning, but certain types of learning, and hold students longer in that zone of proximal development. And so I think it's going to free up time for schools, and where we can utilize the expertise of teachers, educators, and experiential learning, the likes of jump personnel, to actually really make a difference on the skills and attributes that are going to have that long-term impact on students. So let AI take care of the stuff that's going to be most efficient to do, and then spend the time as schools on the areas of learning that develop the person, develop the individual, develop the character. And that's what I think I get quite excited about. I see AI as a big opportunity for education if used well.
Great. And James, what would you add into that in terms of your view of the evolution?
Yeah, I think it's a great synopsis and an excellent reminder that one of the most important words in education right now is "and," right? It's not this or this, it's "and," right? And I think exactly as Brett said, to step up on the balcony and get the bigger picture of, or maybe ask the question, what does flourishing look like for this child? And then how might AI help accelerate that, advance that, be more efficient? With the bigger picture of what does wellness look like, or what does learning look like as a whole? And I think part of it is us, and hey, I'm talking about me now as an old curmudgeonly outdoor ed guy, right? Who learned to like navigate with map and compass. My son's got his smartwatch now, and he just goes, "What are you doing? Just go this way." And of course, the next thing is smart glasses, right? Which is just, "Hey, find my route." Like you're looking at what I'm looking at. So I think part of it is just being open to the ongoing developments and the advantages that we have, right? So how might it help enhance my experiential, like experience out wherever I am in the world? And what does that look like? I think that's the bigger question too.
I loved what Breton said earlier about the idea that we have high hopes that AI will be able to help with the fundamental knowledge that students need to develop, and embracing it for that. I come from the Seymour Papier train of thought that each teacher's here is responsible to create the conditions for really developing developing students, right? Like we're not trying to give them knowledge, we're trying to create their ability to think differently, to be inventive, to be curious, and we can do that through these experiences we're talking about. Whereas the base knowledge, what happened in Moby Dick, great novel. I think people should read it, but at the same time, you just know it's a whale and the guy hunted it, right? We're good to go. So I think we can get some of the facts out of the way pretty quickly and not spend too much time worrying about what Ahab did with Muhammad there. I think there's a lot of different pieces as we look at creating opportunities for students, that once that base of understanding information is there, we can expand on it, give them experiences around it, and then talk about their white whales and what are they hoping to accomplish in life and how do they go out and hunt it, and what happens when you're unsuccessful and what does that look like. So I think these are all the bits and pieces that we can pull into real life learning for them as they develop that base knowledge. I'm not I'm not adverse to AI at all. I think that, like was said earlier, that too often schools are shunning it for what it means in the honor code and not embracing it for what, if we're doing good teaching and good learning, students won't be able to use it to answer the questions we're asking.
Well, one of the people listening put through a question around AI and experiential education. And sometimes we think about experiential education as going outside, but AI gives us this ability to create. I can now go in a spaceship through VR, and I can go into, so our experiences are now being able to be very diverse. I can walk through a marketplace. I can have a debate in about race with different people from different races using AI in a really interactive way. And so, well, what have you guys seen around AI as a tool for creating experiential education without having to get on a bus or on an airplane or anything? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know whose turn it is to go, but I mean, one of my favorite things that I've seen is in a 4th and 5th grade classroom around social studies, developing an understanding of art in the Renaissance period and being able to explore through VR this concept of not just the art pieces, but where they actually sit today. So visiting the churches, visiting the cathedrals, visiting the different areas, because when you see it in that context, as opposed to a picture in a book, the students are able to do a 360 and look around and see everything around them to really get an understanding of that place of grandeur and how this art actually exemplifies a period of time in a place that people lived.
Brett?
Yeah, I think it's that you just be able to increase opportunities. It's difficult to, to be taking students out all the time. So I had an experience last week with the Apple Vision Pro, and I was absolutely shocked at how realistic it was. I'm scared of heights. I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I had to sit down. I was feeling terrified. I think it's that opportunity of, you're talking about something. How can you make it more authentic? Well, if you can't go there, this is kind of the next best thing. One way I saw it being used was actually with a teacher who was doing a master's degree, and they were visiting different sites as a group. And so they were in their classroom with a VR headset, and together they were visiting different locations and talking about it and how it related to learning. And I thought that was pretty powerful.
Great. Anything to add, James?
I guess what came to my mind was just the long arc of human history I mean, it used to be people telling stories about something that they'd seen. Then it was a book with pictures of those things. Then it became videos and like moving color, like color videos of that thing. Then it's VR. And if the next thing's a holodeck, which is a full sensory experience with smells, touch, taste, sound, everything, well, so be it. I mean, that's the arc of kind of how we're experiencing the world. And I think we just need to, as Brett said originally too, this isn't an or option, it's an and option, right? And how are we going to use that to build on learning?
Well, and the only thing I'd like to add to this too is that as we look at technology, often people say, well, that's great if you can afford it. But a lot of the VR opportunities now are literally blank goggles that you stick an iPhone into. So if you don't have to have the Apple set that costs, I don't know, 3,000 US dollars or whatever the crazy cost is, you can do it with the products that you have on hand within your environment, and just creating that so that students can see it in a different way.
I'll do a shameless plug of Changchun American International School, IDCO, and the crew up there. They're doing amazing stuff, and they're doing some really cool stuff with humanoid robots. But I think a lot of the China schools are at the forefront of it. And so anyone who's listening, I would encourage you to reach out to Changchun American International School and or other schools in China, because they're really at the forefront of some of that utilization of AI as an experiential education tool. The last on this frame, I would just say, James and I were talking at IRCOS last week around, everyone's talking about AI as this like speedboat that's like just ripping through education and changing, and everyone's looking at AI as a speedboat and not the wake behind it of all of the change and transformation. And one of the key things is around the role of the adult to child interaction is fundamentally evolving from a teacher to an educator to a facilitator to a coach to a mentor. The spectrum, it's really shifting. And what are your thoughts of the expectations of people in the classroom becoming experiential educators, essentially? And how do we upskill and train a whole generation of teachers who were taught to teach that now need to evolve their practice and approach? Maybe James, I'll start with you, and we'll kind of go to Ron and Brett.
Yeah, I mean, one of the walkaways from a lot of the presentations at that conference was actually the idea of like building in bots, and this is going to be something that we need to do is like on our team, there's going to be humans and there's going to be non-humans, and that's part of our team now. And I think that's also part of the mindset of that's part of a child's education. There's going to be humans, there's going to be non-humans, and that's just going to be normal. And again, that's just part of our own evolutionary jump to be able to feel comfortable in moving like in that direction.
Ron, anything to add?
Yeah, sorry, my lights are on a sensor. I love AI for that purpose. When we look at what we're trying to do, I think it's really important also to have time for wellness and connectivity. So creating in our schedule, not with the team member that's a bot, but how the human side comes through. So understanding from a teacher's relationship with students, and I liked what you said earlier, Justin, about moving from that teacher to mentor. And really developing that connection with students becomes so much more important, because so much of their lives will be through a device or through a bot or through something else. So getting those times of advisory, getting those times of learning out in the field or out and about without the devices is going to become even more precious and more important for these students. So building that in, I think, is the key.
Great. Thanks. Brett?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with what both James and Ron have said on both those points. And I think just one other addition would be, I think, something's had to give a little bit with teaching. Teaching has become busier and busier and busier. As soon as email came along, teachers are now having to, respond to that lost lunchbox at, 8 o'clock at night, and the anger from the parent, and the, why wasn't this marked, and what have you. And the demands have just increased and increased. And we're asking teachers to teach, not from a textbook, in more authentic ways. And we're asking them to collaborate. And there's just so much more on a teacher's plate. And when I hear Ron talk about, the role of the teacher, when I hear James talk about that integration, I think it's going to be great for teachers, because I think it's going to allow them to focus on the parts of the job they're really good at, and the parts that really energize them and they love, that connection with students. And that's going to be the most important part. And the design part that teachers are very, very good at, having more time for that and getting them out of the weeds a bit. So I see it as a real positive in that regard.
Beautiful segue into our next topic, which is community, connection, and belonging. And James, you're going to lead us off on this. I'll start with a quote, which is from a beautiful community builder named David McLeod. And he always says, people grow best in community when they feel seen, valued, and connected. People grow best in a community when they feel seen, valued, and connected. And so, James, in terms of experiential education and your work at NIST and creating community, how do you ensure that students feel seen, valued, and connected through the experiences that are being designed on school campus? And what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with the quote, right? And we know that just from anthropology, right? Groups of bigger than 150 tend to split so they can stay small and somewhat intimate. And I think there is a magic number with that. I know that many schools and those listening will have done some kind of an exercise around, putting all the kids' pictures up, making sure that there's an adult there who can connect with them in some way, making sure that they have a homeroom, a community, something that's there, right? So the element of belonging is critical, because we know the opposite of that is isolation, and we know the negative impact of that potentially as well. So we definitely want us to feel connected around a purpose. And I think this is where the magic of experiential education really, really starts to kick in, right? It's hey, we're a group, we're doing this thing together, right? We're out doing this. And I love Michael Easter in the book, The Comfort Crisis, talks about this, right? Nothing brings people together more than being uncomfortable together, right?
Mm.
So that, like, I can tell you how many times I've been on a mountain with people in the most horrible conditions, and it's amazing how we all come together because we're all suffering with this all, right? And there's to be able to suffer together, and I mean that in the nicest way, right? That kind of not like that reasonable way, I think is an incredible accelerant on connection. And to be able to do that together and experience together, I think is something that's a real opportunity for schools to do in intentional ways as well going into the future.
Over to you, Ron.
Well, I think it's important also to find ways to create that time within the schedule. I mean, obviously you have your advisory periods and you have got homeroom or PCG or whatever you want to call it, but it's also taking that connection time. I'll give you an example, again, personal connection. I have a son who joined a club in 4th grade this year, and he's so excited that last Friday, for the last hour of the day, he called it during cleanup time, because typical Friday cleanup time. Instead of having cleanup time, they had club time, and he was able to go to that club and try out some new things and get comfortable with a different group of people than he normally would see. And as a 4th grader, he was in there with 4th and 5th graders and got a different teacher, one he doesn't usually have, leading that activity. I've seen it where we also can provide leadership for our kids, as they can, especially in middle school and high school, identify activities that they want to see at lunchtime or see during club periods that we integrate into the school day, that they can lead out and have a karaoke club that just sings useless songs, to me at least, but lovely songs to them, things that they really get engaged around and value. But that creates a different community for them as well, because then kids, they walk by every day, they now realize that they have talents or even enjoy the same type of genre of music. So I think those are the important connections that we can continue to make, and help people see the value in each and every individual, so that there's not a perception that I'm better than you because I'm in the advanced class, or I'm better than you because I'm good at sports. It demystifies those cliques and puts people out of their comfort zones, or maybe into comfort zones that they didn't know they had.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Over to you, Brett.
Yeah, my point, very similar. I think, how many times have you gone away on some level of excursion or stepped outside the classroom, that the traditional walls of a classroom, and seen students thrive in a different way? The number of times teachers come back and sort of say, wow, I struggle with that student in the class, but they were amazing as soon as we got outside. And I think there's that idea of, you can be really good at school, and that school environment suits certain students, and being able to step outside and into that, and as James talked about, that uncomfortable part, some people thrive in that. You see a different set of skills that come through. We just recently had a trip where we have a student who's here at the school on a heavily modified program be the leader. They got to sailing. This kid's been sailing their whole life, and they were leading the sailing. Now in the corridors, you see the students interacting in a different way. That student's being seen. They are now connected, and that's pretty awesome. And I think experiential learning really brings that out, and you see the strengths of a group as well.
I mean, I do think that in our experience, it's one of the biggest aha moments. If you were to rank in all of our post-program surveys, the students say, I never thought of teachers in this way. I never knew Mr. James was afraid of heights. I never knew that he didn't like bugs, or that it just creates commonalities that they never even perceived of, because, they only see in this one context, and friends are made that have never been friends before. So I think there's some real strong strength there. We're going to move on to the final main topic, and then we'll do some closing thoughts. But the final topic is around leadership as a practice. And Brett, will get you to start the conversation on this. And I really, really love this quote. It's one of my favorite quotes around leadership, and comes from Kouzos and Posner. So leadership is for everyone. Leadership should be practiced every day, and leadership should happen everywhere. And the quote basically is trying to encapsulate this concept of demystifying leadership as this big position that you get voted into, but leadership is for everyone. Leadership should be practiced every day, and leadership should happen everywhere. And so the question is, in your schools, how do you create a shared understanding of what leadership truly means in an authentic way across your school community, among students, teachers, and parents? And what have you seen in your work in navigating these conversations?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I love the quote. Leadership is for everyone, and I think we talk in I think many schools we talk about formal leadership and informal leadership, and how you can have a significant impact, without a title. And I think one researcher who really shaped my thinking a lot is Alma Harris, who wrote a lot on distributed leadership. And one of the fundamental things she talks about is, to have, true leadership opportunities, you have to have autonomy. You have to have some level of autonomy. Otherwise, it's just simply delegation. And no one likes doing someone else's work, right? So how do you set up in a school, really authentic opportunities for people to have decision making, not just those informal positions? And I think another key thing for me, when we have a lot of student leadership here in the school, it's something that has been a part of the culture for a very, very long time. Students running their own clubs, and I just heard of one yesterday. There are a group of students in grade 11 that are interested in the legal profession, so they've set up a legal club where they, are spending time debating. I mean, and they have that sort of autonomy and ownership, which I love to see. I think another key thing is around making it authentic, in the sense that in schools, I think we have the tendency to take away some of the barriers from students, make it easier for them to lead, where I really think that's where the learning happens. So if they're wanting to lead something, they should experience it like I do. Where's the funding coming from? Where's the room allocation? You need some supervision. They have to figure all that stuff out, because if we do it for them, they're not really learning. So I think the key things for me is, that authentic experience, but really ensuring that if you're giving someone a chance to lead, they actually have some decision making, they have some autonomy in that process.
James?
Yeah, I love the quote too. I mean, leadership is for everyone. And when you said it, what popped into my mind was, in the regular military, there's a hierarchy. And your point is, you don't think, you just take orders. And the interesting thing is, on the other end of the spectrum, when we look at like Special Forces Tier 1 operators, it's the exact opposite. And they're actually taught that sometimes I need to step in and lead, sometimes I need to step back and follow. And it's the same thing. Whether I'm leading or following, I'm still influencing and moving the group forward. And it's interesting for me because in a school setting, look at someone like Bob Garmston, who's doing adaptive schools, and actually he talks less about the importance of the facilitator and more about the importance of the team as co-facilitating. And actually, successful teams are more about good teammates than successful leaders. And I think that's an interesting way to look at this, that we're all leading all the time, whether it's positional, but there's certainly influence happening. And I think one of the things that we're going to start seeing, and I think we experience it in that experiential like element, I think third culture kids with the kind of fluidity around I can become, I can fit in, I can move through the world with not well comfort, but at least I'm comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think the third culture kid experience is actually going to give our kids, many of our kids, a real advantage as they are more fluid in their, I'm always kind of leading, but whether it's a title or whether I'm on a team or whatever that looks like, my job is to move the group forward in whatever the role is that I'm in. I think that's going to be a wave like of the future.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think the school's role has to be able to provide leadership knowledge to the students as well. I mean,
Mm.
we expect kids to do a lot, but we don't always teach them how to do that. And, one of the things that we've worked hard at HCAS, and the high school does a wonderful job, is we have just over 150 clubs and activities that students can join. And then there's another probably 40 or 50 that you're allowed to just create if you want to. So there's that opportunity to create, but there's a caveat. If you want to coach, if you want to be a team captain, or if you want to have a club or activity, you also have to attend the Leadership Summit, because that role then teaches you how to book a room and run a budget and develop some kind of rules for how a meeting might take place and how to make sure that you're hearing from all the people within the room. And I think those types of things allow us then to spread out, and everybody can be a leader, but everybody also needs to know how to lead. So how do we then provide those opportunities forward? It is hard because we do offer a lot of different training sessions throughout the year, and they're usually on weekends. And that's the first thing you learn as a leader, is you have to give up some time, and you have to make it a sacrifice to be able to be in front. So I think these pieces all come together into that. How do we, as schools and organizations, look for ways to not only create opportunities, but then to train students and to educate students on how to be the people we expect them to be in those roles?
Absolutely powerful. I'll just do a piece of segue to this concept of failure and flourishing, and how do we create autonomy, is actually the next virtual roundtable we'll be doing with Marta from WAB and Angela Menkel from IB Schools and Fatma from ARS in Accra. They'll be coming together and talking about human flourishing and designing schools where challenge and choice and true failure is allowed. So it's a nice segue to kind of end and wrap this conversation to feed into December 2nd. We'll be doing that conversation. So, but to close off around the concept of experiential education, if you could give one piece of advice to school leaders trying to move experiential learning from the margins to the core, what would it be? And what would you say is the one piece of advice that you would give to a school leader? Take a moment to think about that, and whoever's ready can start.
Well, it's always easy to just go first, I think. Be bold, take risks, try it, because you won't know if it will work until you do.
Great. Ready, Brett?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that point of, what gets measured gets done. So, for us, it was, we pushed ourselves, we put it into our strategic plan. Now we sort of have to, we have to deliver that. For us, that was the first step. And then we, figured out the how and the what next.
And James?
Yep. I'll echo both and say, be courageous. There's only X amount of time. So you're going to have to compromise and do less of something so you can do more of something better.
Mhm.
So I will say my final words, which is just deep gratitude for opening this conversation. The reason that we decided to host this is that we felt like this is a really important conversation for heads of school to be having. And so thank you, the three of you. And thank you for everyone who shared questions. We didn't get to all of them. We'll try and get to some of them in the future conversations. There's lots of applause going on. That's great. And we'll try and get to them in future conversations, and there'll be a follow-up resource that we send. We'll try and do a little bullet point to address where they can. But again, big thank you to three of my mentors in education for making time for us. And thank you for everyone who joined us. And that's it. Oh, look, the darkness comes to Ron. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys. Bye, everybody.